wish to find. Earlier this morning, we also were really pleased to launch a series of survey insights, so evidence and bits, statistics from our most recent State of Infrastructure Engagement, which ran from 2018 to 2019. If this interests you, please let us know, because we are very happy. If you don't have a QR code reader, we can email these to you. But these are stats and facts and evidence from this survey that is now in its third year, which we hope that you as engagement professionals, and presuming that many of you, because you're in this session, work in the infrastructure sector, that you can use to support your arguments for better buy-in for community engagement. So we have statistics that say stakeholder pressure is the #1 most impactful issue in major projects that are delayed, canceled, mothballed, or delivered not as originally intended. We have statistics now that show that 40% of community engagement teams in Australia are made up of 5 or less individuals. And so when you're making arguments for resourcing, we're really hopeful that these are the types of figures that might help you to have the evidence base that we've been hearing people ask for, to really support your capacity to make the case for your needs. The other thing that we found in this year's survey, and this is not what this session is about, but I'm just so excited to share with you, and you're all like, yeah, keep going. We also, in the 2018 to 2019 survey, focused on the theme of professionalization of community engagement. And in that theme, we wanted to find out more about your qualifications as practitioners, the focus of your highest level tertiary degree, the perceptions of other colleagues in different disciplines of community engagement. And one of the things, the stats that I want to share with you today is that you are all a very highly educated group of individuals. So 90%, in fact 91% of survey respondents held a tertiary level degree. And almost half of those held a master's level degree. And that compares, that 91% compares against the Australian average of about 24% of Australians who hold a tertiary level degree. So relative to the general Australian population, you are a very well qualified group of individuals. We think you deserve to be recognized as such. So congratulations to you all. We are very pleased, as Kirsty mentioned, to work with a number of industry, government, and civil society partners, and we are proudly working with IAP2, and we're so pleased to be here today. What we want to talk about today, and I am going to presume that most of you work at least partly in the infrastructure sector, and I should say by the infrastructure sector we do take a very broad brush definition. My own work began in the mining, oil, and gas sector, and so I still do quite a lot of work around mining and extractives, and I would consider mining assets to be a form of infrastructure. So for those of you who are working in M&E, this will reflect, we hope, some of your experiences. We also take social infrastructure into consideration. So being at the ANU, I'm based in the ACT, and there's a lot of discussion that we're having with the ACT Department of Education. Okay, so we're taking a really broad brush definition of infrastructure in this work. And what we wanted to start to unpack is what actually is social risk? How can we as practitioners better define and understand it? And ultimately, and I should put my hand up and say, I'm a qualitative researcher primarily. I love interviewing people. I've done ethnographies. I do a lot of in-depth social research. My main field of work is in social, human rights, and gender impact assessments. So I should just say, I'm not the kind of person who thinks that we should or could put a dollar value on everything. But I do think that we can do better at identifying, measuring, and monitoring social risk, and that some of these issues that we work with can be better priced, and that is going to make a much stronger argument for the role and the need for community engagement for successful project delivery. And when we consider that Infrastructure Australia just announced across 15 years a potential $600 billion infrastructure investment, we really need to get this right. So what we've been talking about is what is social risk, and here's what we're doing now and how we can help, and literature currently tells us that this is the kind of academic bit. And I should say the way the session is going to run today is I want to take you through what we have found from the literature. And then we're going to turn to you because you're the people who really know what's going on in this space. And we're going to ask you some questions about how you identify and model and integrate social risk into your own work. That's what we really want to understand because I can tell you, and you're going to see in a minute, that doesn't exist in the literature. We don't know what you do, and we really want to know so that we can help you to make it better, and to make it easier, and to make it more effective. So we've got to find out what's missing. We've got to do some gap filling. We are also, if this work appeals to you and you can see value in it, we are going to be undertaking a series of interviews with risk managers and people working in this space. And if there's someone who you were thinking, oh, you've got to talk to so-and-so, please come and tell us. Because we'll be doing those interviews probably in early December, so we've got time to add them to our list. And then we're going to try and bring all of this together so that we can deliver to you a framework identifying likely precursors for social risk. So to give you a really reliable risk register. When we first started talking about these issues, and Kirsty mentioned before that we have our social risk working group, we identified these kind of 6 areas where we might be doing work. And with the social risk working group, we were able to narrow down to the 3 that you see highlighted there. So we're very interested in this work around social risk modeling, including some pricing. We're very interested in identifying those factors or precursors of social risk. And in doing that, we are hoping that we can also enrich understanding of the value of engagement. So some of you may be aware of the work that IOP2 was involved in a couple of years ago with PwC, where they produced a report called Penny, was it Valuing Better Engagement? Yes. Yes, and Penny was very involved in that report. So we're also interested in building on work that's been done in the past that could use a bit more attention. Okay, so today we're going to focus here on risk, but we see risk as interconnected, both with value, what value can community engagement produce, but also cost. What costs can good community engagement and proper management of social risk help us to avoid? Are you with me? Nobody's left the room yet, so that's good. All right, hang with me. So this is how we see us getting there. So if you want graphics like this, and I preempted myself because I was so excited, this is what we're seeing in our research. Stakeholder pressure matters. And this year, tied with stakeholder pressure as the most impactful issue, we saw regulatory and planning issues. That is secure #1. And guys, we're going to give you the QR codes later as well. If you want to actually have these proper and download them, we can get those to you. And I hope that QR code is in here, and if it's not, we'll get it for you. Okay, this stuff matters. That's the takeaway here. We also know that in 2018, according to our survey respondents, 30% of projects on which they were working, so we're looking at almost a third of projects that are delayed, they're mothballed, they're delivered but not as originally intended, they are canceled. So we've got almost a third of projects that are in this space. And survey respondents said 69% agree or strongly agree that social risk and management of social risk played a major role in these negative project processes or outcomes, depending on whether it was already delayed or fully canceled. So these slides are here to say social risk matters, and we need a way to do better. We also asked respondents in our survey, at what points in the 4 kind of very broad level project phases do you experience the most impactful stakeholder or community issues? And you can see we've run from problem definition through to closeout. The majority of our respondents said that the most impactful stakeholder and community issues occur, and maybe this isn't surprising, but now we have data, occur during planning and delivery phases. When you map that, as we have here, against Australia's current $235 billion infrastructure pipeline, we are in a very vulnerable state. We are at a point where things could get pretty hairy. So what can we do about it? Well, I'm an academic, so when I see stuff like that, I just go to the library. Okay. What can we do about it? What we can do is we can try to understand what do we already know about social risk, not just from the infrastructure sector, but from all industries, and not just from Australia, but internationally. So for the past several months, we've undertaken a comprehensive international literature review, which includes academic literature as well as relevant guidelines, reports, and government documents. So we've examined, I reckon, like close to 250,000 words of data to think about what is it that's being published. And we were able to identify 5 key themes. The questions that we asked, for those of you who are researchers in the room, this was guided by the question of how can we understand whether anyone is already measuring or modeling social risk, and if so, how are they doing that, and how is that being defined? So these were the kinds of things we were looking for. And we're going to come back to that question in a little bit and get you to tell us what you're doing. Okay, so there were 5 themes that emerged from the literature, and I love how you can do like 6 or 8 months of work and then it looks like this. Okay, so, but there you go. Wow. So theme 1 was that in the literature we know that contracts really matter. So actually including social and community risks or things that might be identified as such within contracts and contract management, and really having that flow down through to contractors and subcontractors that there is an expectation that you will manage these things and behave in a certain way. That comes out in the literature is really important. Similarly, what we're seeing, and this is also reflected in broader work around corporate social responsibility and sustainable development, employee agreements matter. The entire project team ideally would have some form of KPI or a formalized responsibility for the identification, mitigation, and management, and ideally prevention of social risk. So contracts matter, employee agreements matter. Okay. We have also found that in terms of social risk, this is not something that can be managed through engineering or finance teams. And again, maybe this seems really obvious, but I think it speaks further to this question that we've been having. And we started this debate ourselves last year here at IMP2 around professionalization of community engagement. Community engagement as a practice and as a profession is, from the literature, the most critical management tool for these types of risks. And I put there existing, because it's also up to us to envision the future and to think about whether or not there may be new and other and different, or perhaps even just improved things that we want as a cohort to develop. The third thing that comes out, for those of you who worked in mining and extractives, that's a sector that is very advanced in these discussions, largely because of really, really risky and bad historical experiences that have been very costly. So the M&E sector does tend to lead on the creation of what we might also call grievance mechanisms. There's an entire field of literature on that. But what we see from this literature is that complaints mechanisms are necessary. So what does this mean? It means an organizationally agreed, centralized way of reporting, but also responding to complaints. So it's also linked to social license because it has an element of promise keeping within it. And that mechanism is accessible and transparent. That community members know it exists. You can have a complaints mechanism, but if it's on page 642 of your internal policy, it's not really useful. So the literature tells us that about complaints mechanisms. We know, and I'm sure in your own experiences, and again, sometimes I read academic literature and I just do a forward slap, because like, of course. But what's important here is that we have validation. There's been research done, and we know that this is the case, so we can start to move beyond our gut feeling towards really feeling assured that, yeah, actually when I think that social risk is happening, you know, it is associated with land access, with acquisition, with resettlement. You can go out now and you can say, the literature tells us this. That may help you, I don't know. It makes me feel better on a daily basis. Theme 5, Again, mining and extractives is a sector that's very prominent in this literature. So they're way ahead of the infrastructure sector in terms of research on these issues. But construction, and by that we mean the FIFO, the DIDO, that is a key point at which social risk increases. Many of you may work in remote parts of Australia. I know Nicole from Orcon's from Western Australia. I imagine you work in other parts of the state. Many of you may work internationally. I myself have spent a lot of time working in the Pacific and PNG. FIFO and DIDO have a lot of very serious health, cultural, and social flow-on effects. So this was the fifth and final theme that emerged from the literature. What we also looked at, and I'm almost done here, and I really appreciate you bearing with me, and I hope you're enjoying getting a lot of information, and we're going to turn it over to you. But what we also looked at were whether there existed any models that people were using to really measure, monitor, identify social risk. And the answer was twofold. One, there are a few, and this is one. This comes from Zanfale and Anderson, and this comes out of the mining and extractive sector. Okay, so there are a few models. But the second question we have, and this is something we really want to turn to today as well, was how comparable are these models to the other risk management and risk registers that are being used for what we would consider to be more traditional types of risk? So financial, actuarial, environmental risk types. And what we see is that the models being used in social risk are not really comparable to those other risk assessment models. And what that means is we have some real challenges for integration. And what we'd like to see from this research is a better integration of social risk with the consideration and management of those other risk types to see it take an equal position. And I realize there's a lot on these slides. That is because we do intend to circulate them afterwards, so you'll have access to the information. But, so these models tend to use things like, and I really like this, but it's not like other risk measures, heading for trouble all the way through to off the rails. So, do you think we should have some questions and then go to the thing? What do you think, Kirsty? Yeah. So that was a lot of information. That was a lot of information. It is my job as a professor to answer people's questions. So, what questions do you have about this? And then we'd really like to hear from you as to your experiences of identifying, managing, and modeling social risk. Or just stunned you with the question.
I might have missed a bit, but the discussion around social risk seems to be mostly from the perspective of the sponsor of the project. If we ask the question from the community or potential other partners, how would they describe the social risk, the elements, the factors, and the good stories?
Yeah, okay, so this is an absolutely critical question. And I really, not to be unclear, I would like to, in a moment, turn this question back to you all and get you to consider that. Because one of the things that we see from the literature is social risk identification, measurement, and management is proponent-led. And communities will have very, very different views on what the risks are in relation to a project. So I agree, what we need to think about as a cohort and as a profession is how do we create models and tools that are community-centered and that lead from a community perspective, but that can necessarily then be integrated back into corporate practice and corporate response. So I think this is a critical question. That's a great pickup. Thank you. Yes?
Previously, you talk about social risk. One of the issues we have to deal with from the government space is we obviously need to prepare business cases very quickly to justify resources and what we're going to do. Is there a plan in this space to quantify in terms of dollar terms? I know you briefly mentioned return on investment, but what's the actual cost of some of this, of the risk?
That is exactly what our plan is with this research program. So what we need to do first, so we have several phases of the research, and I'm not sure if they're, yeah, okay. Let me see if I've got that slide. Okay. I don't have that slide, but I have this slide, which is a nice one. What we need to do first, so first we needed to look at the literature. So from a research perspective, so that this is really robust and that it's very valid and that people from other disciplines will believe what we're saying. We needed this to be a really thorough process. So first we look at the literature. Next, we're going to go out to some experts, and you are included in that today, to see what you think of what you're doing. Then what we want to do is to bring in some of our colleagues who do other types of risk modeling and pricing, and start to create some models that do have these costing measures applied. Another thing that we are doing in the Next Gen program is building an international case database of major infrastructure projects. And we hope with this work to be able to use historical cases to start to test a pricing model. This is going to take us a while to do. So we're looking here at a 3 to 5 year program of work. What we'd like to do with the IAP2 community is to keep you informed as we go along and just help you take that journey with us. And we really appreciate your input and advice into what we're doing. I should look over here to see how much time we have this morning. Okay, so we've got just under an hour. Are there any other questions that would be helpful to answer before we do the activity? Yes, hi.
Hi, so you mentioned it's component-led. Were you talking in particular about components, wearing their brand, if you like, on their pocket, or consultants for them, or do you see a distinction, or is it, costs?
Okay, that's a really great question, and it's an important question. And I think it also, for me, relates back to the first question that was asked about community perspectives. And so this may be a slightly tangential answer, but bear with me. I work a lot in social impact assessment, and I currently serve as president of the International Association for Impact Assessment globally. And one of the things that we're seeing is a growth in what we think of as cumulative impacts. So lots of projects in one place at one time. And so that means there are a lot of t-shirts going around town. But if we go back to that first question, what does the community think and feel? The community doesn't go, oh, and I'm going to use mining names here because that's what Rio Tinto did this and Peabody did that. If you go out and you talk to community members, as you all do, they just say the mining project did this, or last week my gate was blocked and I couldn't access my paddock. That's what they talk about. And so there's this real need now to think from a community perspective, how do we deal with these risks in a way that community members see, feel, and experience them? Because it's not, oh, I read the emblem on the t-shirt, and I know that's not what you were saying, but I think this is an important point. It's, what am I experiencing and how do I deal with that? So how can we have a more empathic approach to something that is a very abstract process? To the question though of like, who's doing this and who's involved, I'll be really interested to hear from you, and in my experience, it is often consultants. So the proponent leads in terms of it's ultimately their responsibility for the risks, and they will have internal management processes for those risks. But it's usually consultants who are brought in to go out and do the impact assessments that inform their risk monitoring and their risk registers. So there's something happening there. We have a question here and a question here, and then we may turn over to all of you. Yes. Hi, I remember you from West Australia.
Not a question, just like building on what you were kind of talking about as far as like the impact and this social risk assessment. And I think, I think from the early market, Paul's topics were around risk assessment and hazard perception, and Sandman built off that work
That's
to
right.
say that model is actually the problem with social risk assessment is that we take a local impact approach rather than take an outrage assessment, because it's the outrage factors that trigger our perception of risk rather than the hazards themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's the missing piece for us in terms of accurate social assessment.
I think this is such an important point, and the point that I think we should all think about as well, and that we experience as in field as practitioners, is the issue about perception. So when a community member perceives that there is a threat or a risk, and I'm sure many of us have had these experiences, even where you might have scientific or engineering or financial data to say, you know, this risk is minimal or it doesn't exist, that perception of risk is just as potent, and also I think
By
to
effect of
participate.
reform, it's more like.
Yeah, just as potent and also just as valid as those other types of risks. So there's a huge question in this work, building on the existing work, and that's why we've done the LIB review. How do we really get that value across? Because we haven't done it yet. Maybe we won't be the people to do it, but we're going to try. We're going to try. And we'll come back. You can have, it's like a round robin. You can have the final question.
Oh, great, thank you. I just wanted to kind of add to my earlier question and I guess suggest that we not go into that dichotomy of proponent and community,
Yeah.
because I think there is another wedge flying around here, and that's the political perspective.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing, and outside of the infrastructure arena, but in ag, I come from Queensland, you know, there's been political interventions in order to achieve biosecurity risk and other risks. So do we always want to have high regulation to manage risk? No, we don't. So not necessarily. Sometimes it's a good thing, but so there's got to be a myriad of responses, of course. So I think that we need to kind of triangulate and think about political perspectives as well.
Absolutely.
Good and evil.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And indeed, look, in the survey, what you told us was that this year, regulatory and planning issues, and that includes political issues like ministerial changes, policy backflipping, those were ranked #1 most impactful alongside stakeholder and community pressures. These are real issues. Some of the other work that I do is around social license to operate, and we talk about a trifecta of licenses, the social, political, and then the actuarial. So these are really, really critical things, and I appreciate that you all are putting on your complex thinking lenses, because what we're going to ask you to do, we know there is a lot of work to be done here. Like, we're not kidding ourselves. We know a lot of good work has already been done. But in some ways, we are in blue ocean waters here with the potential to develop something that would really shift, particularly the infrastructure sector, we hope, into a new paradigm of working with social risks. So this is what we'll be doing next, but somewhere in these slides, we'll get to what we're doing today. Sorry guys, I won't make you seasick. Okay, there we go. What we would love to hear about from you today is to get you, and also hopefully having the conversation together will be very helpful. You got tables, you got lots of people. I think we've got butcher's paper because it's IAP2. We're holding a session with butcher's paper. If you feel really like you're not at IAP2 unless you have a post-it note, I'm sure we can locate that for you, okay? Or a dot sticker, whatever you need to feel like you're really here. We would like to hear from you today. What we'll get you to do is spend some time working together at your tables, and then we're going to bring it back into a plenary discussion. What are you already doing on social risk? We really want to know, because we talk to so many people in the industry, and what they tell us is, oh, I do this based on my experience. I do it based on gut feel. And I think that that's probably true, but there also must be some other things that are happening. So what do you think and tell us? What do you do? How do you understand it? How do you model it? Are there tools that you're using? Are there documents that you're referring to? So those first questions were about asking you, what are you using? What are you doing? How are you understanding social risk? You know, what is happening? Is it this? We do hear that quite a bit. But the next question is then, because we think we're in this kind of blue ocean space, thinking about social risk. Now, because we're at IUP2, we're going to do a consensus exercise. So at your tables, you must come to a consensus as to the answer to these two questions. And that's going to be hard because we're going to ask you to nail down one thing. So thinking about social risk in consensus mode, what one thing would be the game changer in this space? Can you agree on one thing that would be a game changer? Thinking about social risk, what one thing would just be good enough? You just go, ah, yeah, that's what I was looking for. So, consensus. What's the game changer? What would be good enough? We've got 10 minutes to go, and we would really like to hear from you in particular. So if you've written things down, if you're happy to, please leave those with us, because as researchers, we will be very, very interested to have a look at those. And over the years, working with a lot of students, I'm really good at reading illegible handwriting, so no problems there, don't worry. We want to go to these two questions though, and I'll get to this in a moment, but if you do want to take our survey and win a SPA voucher, that will take you direct to the survey. You can fill it out on your own also. How are we going to change? How are we going to change? What's the change that you want to see here? What would be the game changer? Anybody have a game changer? Yes.
So we had a good discussion at the back here. And we actually started our discussion based on what was good enough versus the game changer. And I want to start there mainly because we thought that good enough would be coming up with a metric around the dollar value of social risk. But then one of our profound people sitting on the table decided that instead of looking at it as social risk, how about the metrics look at social benefit, and that the game changer would actually be exploring the social benefit of the value of what we're doing.
Thank
Well, that's
you
good.
so
At our table, we did the same kind of thing. We said that we should really shift from going to risk to actually it's about justice or equity or something like that. But also, in terms of building that into, and then that should be built into contracts because that solidifies it into another place where you're changing the language and giving you an instrument to work on something like that. Yeah.
So just so we've got justice and equity, and I think I heard you say a social justice approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was your game changer. Yeah. So we're actually really starting to talk here about a reframing of the fundamental issue, aren't we? Yeah, that's exciting. That is really exciting. Okay, so social justice approach. Other groups, other ideas, and please jump in. It's much more interesting when you all start to have a dialogue with each other, and I'm just going to be up here because I'm here. We'll go to Nicole and then we'll go up the back.
So, well, can I play the
Of course you can. That's far more interesting than everyone agreeing.
So I completely agree that is great. However, if we're talking to the decision makers within the corporate world, I also completely agree you've got to talk risk. So I think it's turned, I think to be frank, to be honest, in my humble opinion, it is about risk if you're trying to increase the value of engagement as a result of the impact of social risk. And that leads to kind of the game changer that we named on, which was actually the game changer is how we get engagement to be valued internally. And boringly, that's been the same game changer for about a decade. But until such time as we get the constructors and the project directors and the engineers and all the other blokes around the table agreeing that there's value in this, we won't. They will get the social benefit as a result.
Yeah, so really this game changer again. What's interesting here to me though is that your game changers are very fundamental changes, and they're not even necessarily about social risk per se. These are about fundamental shifts. These are big game changers. Let's go up the back.
We didn't quite have time to test the consensus, but the thing is.
I don't see any compromising at your table, so.
Things were shared responsibility and accountability internally for the social risks. Everyone understands what role they play in it and to prevent and get rid of it. The other thing was similar to the groups over here, in terms of benefits. So I would personally describe that as a cost benefit assessment that's acceptable to our community or our audiences. Not just net benefit or net harm reduction, but the way they weigh up the cost benefit is acceptable to them would be a game changer. And that's more often than not just not there.
Can I ask, as part of that discussion around shared accountability, was there any
The
discussion?
first part was shared accountability.
Yeah.
It's very much.
Was there a discussion around integration of social risk management with other forms of risk management at all?
Yeah, well, we talked about in the question we were asked to look at as what role we play in the risk assessments generally for projects. There was into the broader risk management? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yep. And just out of interest, I wasn't driving at anything in particular, just wondered.
The varying degrees of perception of the authenticity with which our contributions are received or not.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got this notion of shared responsibility and accountability. We've had a lot of discussion around, engagement internally being valued. And I think this is a terrific point about cost-benefit analysis, because one of the kind of cautionary things that I personally often think about when we talk about social risk and when we think about a potential pricing model or any kind of model is how do we avoid that slippery slope towards everything being cost-benefit analysis and losing a genuine valuing of culture and heritage and community intangibles. So I really, really appreciate this idea of, community-led or community acceptable CBA. Thank you. Other things, what's going to be your game changer? And also, what is just good enough? We have such a hard time, and particularly, I'm just going to say, there's a lot of women in this room. I think it's, we have to really challenge ourselves to be okay with good enough. Yeah, because we're all very ambitious and we want, but good enough is okay sometimes. So, anybody got a good enough? Yeah.
We had quite a lot of discussion around whether our good enough was potentially a game changer.
I thought you were going to say whether our good enough was good enough.
But probably one side of the table was leaning towards a slightly more pessimistic view that good enough would be if project components would just do what they said they would do.
Could be a game changer too.
So once you get to the component stage, it doesn't work earlier in the earlier stages.
Oh, so we haven't even talked about timing yet. Let's just pretend the timing doesn't exist today, okay? Because we're in IAP2 fantasy land and we get to have a few nice days of the year where we can enjoy ourselves. So, yeah, this is great. Maybe proponents do what they say they'll do. What else is going to be just good enough? Yeah, hi.
If consultation was adequate before infrastructure was just announced or committed to and dumped on
Are you
authorities to
sure this
deliver.
now we're just in like wish list.
That's the flip side of the last one.
It is. So adequate consultation before announcement. What else? What else would just be good enough?
So we're talking about metrics, and as ideal, but good enough is just having 1, 3, agreed upon metrics that everyone tracks and reports on.
Okay, so we might just have 1 to 3 comparable metrics.
Really
Even
basic.
one.
Even one, really basic one.
We're just gonna go with one comparable
3 would
metric.
be the game changer, 1 would be
Yeah.
good.
Getting people to do it.
Yes.
That's
Okay. Other things that are gonna be just good enough.
Outside of an engagement space, having a recognised way of attributing value or measuring the value, because there's international risk management models, there's nationally recognised this. Unless it's a recognised model, the engagement professionals get it. It's the other people in the room that don't attribute value to it. So we have to find a way of intrinsically doing that.
Yeah, so there's really something important here, isn't there, about having models that we as practitioners can use, but also that are models that are valued and understood by those outside of our discipline. And in this program of work, that's something that we've been very conscientious of from the beginning. And so what we aim to do is to have consultations like these with community engagement practitioners and professionals, but we then take the frameworks and ideas to those in other disciplines, and we're really pushing and testing them so that we can start to speak the shared language. Yes.
The game changing would be if governments would release funds unless there was a comprehensive social risk assessment attached.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because
It's the man after my own heart.
that would be just, because that's where we get caught out. Governments release the funds under clear parameters what the funds need to be used for. Community's not involved in that conversation until the funding's announced. And how hard is it to change the direction when it happens?
The horse is bolted.
It's gone.
Yep. Any other game changers so the approximately have 36 seconds. Anybody have a burning platform? You got a game changer? We want you all to leave here feeling positive and, yes.
I'm not accusing engagement management, but what about risk mapping?
Okay, just
So as in,
as a quick enough.
well, your goal is something that is measurable, and against that, there may be particular stakeholders or conditions that individually or collectively together have a problem with risk.
Yeah, so this is something as well that feels really doable, and that I imagine a lot of people are doing. Good.
In
Thank
the 5
you.
seconds we have
Kirsty.
Well, we have 9 seconds left.
Guys, the insights we give you are as good as the information you give us, so please don't leave the room without scanning the QR code and filling out the survey. It does have a lot of questions around social risk, and we would love the information. If we had everyone in this room fill it out, it would be a really fabulous start. And there's a spa voucher. Thank you.
So fill it in, and when you go back to work, get your other non-community engagement colleagues working in the sector to fill in the survey. The more data we have on board for people, the more it will help. Thank you all so much.